I still remember the smell of freshly waxed floors, the sound of squeaky sneakers against linoleum, and the weight of anticipation that hung in the air that spring morning. It was 1998, and I was 12 years old, sitting at my desk with sweaty palms, waiting for Mrs. Holloway to hand back our history tests. The classroom buzzed with the usual pre-grade anxiety. Tommy Wilson was crossing his fingers so hard they were turning white. Jessica Tanner was biting her pencil down to a nub. Even Marcus, who never seemed to care about anything academic, was sitting up straight, eyes fixed on Mrs. Holloway's desk, where our future lay in a neat stack of papers. "I'm sure I failed," whispered Lainey from behind me. I completely blanked on the Civil War questions. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat felt like it was stuffed with cotton. This wasn't just any test. This was the comprehensive exam that would determine 30% of our final grade. I had studied for weeks, staying up late with flashcards spread across my bedroom floor, quizzing myself until my eyes burned and the dates and names blurred together. Mrs. Holloway cleared her throat, silencing the room. She was in her 50s, with salt and pepper hair always pulled back into a tight bun, wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose, and her lips seemed permanently set in a thin line. She had been teaching at Jefferson Middle School for 25 years, and rumor had it she had never given an A+ to any student in her entire career. "When I call your name," she announced, "please come forward to receive your test." One by one, my classmates approached her desk. Some returned to their seats with relieved smiles, others with slumped shoulders. I watched Mrs. Holloway's face, carefully as she handed out each paper, searching for a hint of what awaited me. Marcus Johnson, Jessica Tanner, William Peterson. The stack grew smaller. My heart hammered against my ribs. Tommy Wilson, Lainey Adams. Finally, only a few tests remained. I was certain mine was among them. I had checked and double-checked the attendance sheet when handing it in. I knew Mrs. Holloway had collected my test. I had even written my name extra carefully at the top, Zora Williams, in my neatest handwriting. Jennifer Collins, Christopher Sanchez. The last paper was handed out. Mrs. Holloway shuffled some documents on her desk and began discussing the upcoming chapter. My hand shot up. "Excuse me, Mrs. Holloway? I didn't get my test back." She barely looked up from her lesson plan. "I've handed back all the tests I have, Zora." But I turned mine in. I know I did. My voice sounded small in the suddenly quiet classroom. Mrs. Holloway sighed, as if I was being particularly difficult. "Perhaps you forgot to put your name on it. I have one unmarked paper here." She held up a test but didn't move to bring it. To me. That must be mine. I remember writing my name clearly. "Well, I don't see it." Her tone was dismissive. "We'll sort it out later. Now, open your textbooks to page 143. The instruction was clear. Discussion over. I lowered my hand slowly, confusion turning to a dull ache in my stomach. I glanced around at my classmates, most of whom were already flipping through their textbooks, the moment forgotten. But Tommy caught my eye and gave me a puzzled look. He had been sitting next to me during the test. He had seen me hand it in after. "Class!" I approached Mrs. Holloway's desk while the other students filed out. "Mrs. Holloway, about my test. Zora, I told you we'll sort it out later." She didn't look up from her papers. "But that unmarked test you mentioned, could I see it? I'm sure it's mine." She finally looked at me, her expression unreadable behind those wire-rimmed glasses. "It seems to have gotten lost." "Lost? But you just had it during class." "That's enough, Zora. These things happen. You'll have an opportunity to make up the test next week." I stood there, words failing me. Make up the test? After all those late nights studying? After all that preparation? Is there a problem? A new voice entered the conversation. Mr. Reynolds, the English teacher from across the hall, was standing in the doorway. No problem, Mrs. Holloway answered quickly. Zora here is just concerned about a misplaced test. Administrative matter. Nothing more. Mr. Reynolds looked from Mrs. Holloway to me, his kind eyes taking in my distressed expression. I see. He adjusted his glasses. Well, Zora, if you need any help preparing for a makeup test, my door is always open. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds, I managed to say. I left the classroom with a heaviness in my chest that had nothing to do with the weight of my backpack. Something wasn't right. I knew it in my bones. That evening, I told my mother what had happened. Are you sure you turned it in? Mom asked, stirring dinner on the stove. The smell of collard greens and cornbread filled our small kitchen. Positive, Mom. I remember putting it on her desk, with everyone else's. Mom wiped her hands on her apron, her brow furrowed. Well, maybe it really did get lost in the shuffle. These things happen, baby. But she had it during class. She was holding it. Mom paused, a strange expression crossing her face. Has Mrs. Holloway ever treated you differently than the other students? I picked at a loose thread on the tablecloth. Sometimes I think she doesn't call on me as much. And last month, when I answered a question correctly about reconstruction, she just nodded and moved on. But when Jessica gave the same answer in different words, Mrs. Holloway praised her for being insightful. Mom's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing. What should I do? I asked. She came and sat beside me, taking my hands in hers. You study for that makeup test. You study harder than you've ever studied before. And you ace it. That's what you do. But that's not fair, Mom. I already took the test. I already did the work. Life isn't always fair, Zora. But you keep doing your best anyway. That's how you win? I nodded, but a part of me rebelled against this advice. It wasn't just about retaking a test I had already taken. It was about being invisible, about having my work dismissed without explanation, about the sinking feeling that no matter how hard I tried, some people would never see me. The next day, I arrived at school early, determined to find my test. The hallways were quiet. Most students not due to arrive for another 20 minutes. I headed straight for Mrs. Holloway's classroom, but she wasn't there yet. The door was locked. As I stood there, considering my options, Mr. Reynolds appeared, a cup of coffee in one hand, a stack of essays in the other. Zora, you're here early. I was looking for Mrs. Holloway. She usually doesn't arrive until the first bell. He tilted his head, studying me. Is this about your test? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Mr. Reynolds seemed to consider something. Come into my classroom for a moment. I followed him across the hall. Unlike Mrs. Holloway's room, with its rigid rows of desks and bare walls, Mr. Reynolds's classroom was arranged in a semicircle, with colorful posters of famous authors and inspirational quotes lining the walls. He set down his coffee and papers, then turned to face me. Zora, I want you to know that I overheard some students talking yesterday. They were discussing the history test scores. My heart skipped. What did they say? Tommy Wilson was telling Jessica Tanner that he had glimpsed the score on your test when Mrs. Holloway was collecting them. He said you had a 98%. My breath caught. 98? That would be the highest score in the class. Mr. Reynolds nodded slowly. Tommy got a 93. He was quite impressed with your score. But why would Mrs. Holloway say my test was lost if she graded it? Mr. Reynolds's expression turned careful. I can't speculate on that, Zora. But I want you to know that I believe you handed in your test. And if you say your name was on it, I believe that too. Hope fluttered in my chest. Someone believed me. What should I do? Let me look into this. In the meantime, why don't you write down everything you remember about taking and submitting your test? Details matter in situations like this. I spent lunch period in the library, writing down every detail I could remember about the test day. How I had double-checked every answer. How I had written my name at the top in blue ink. How I had placed my test face down on Mrs. Holloway's desk, third from the top in the stack. After school, I caught up with Tommy in the hallway. "Hey, Tommy, can I ask you something?" He looked surprised but stopped to talk. "Sure, what's up?" "Did you see my history test score?" His eyes widened slightly. Yeah. I wasn't trying to snoop or anything. But when Mrs. Holloway was collecting them, yours was on top of mine for a second. You got a 98, best score in the class." "You're sure it was a 98? Positive? Red pen? Big number at the top. Why?" "Mrs. Holloway says my test is lost, that I need to retake it." Tommy frowned. "That doesn't make sense. I saw her grade it." "Thanks, Tommy." I started to walk away, then turned back. "If Mrs. Holloway asks you about this conversation—" "I never saw anything," Tommy said with a knowing nod. The next day, I arrived at school to find an unusual buzz of activity. Students were whispering in the hallways, casting glances my way. When I reached my locker, Lainey was waiting for me, practically bouncing with excitement. "Zora, have you heard?" "Heard what?" "Mr. Reynolds found your test. It was in the faculty lounge, at the bottom of a stack of papers. He brought it to Principal Davidson this morning." My heart leaped. "He found it? With my name on it?" "Yes. And get this. It had a 98% written on it in Mrs. Holloway's handwriting. Tommy was right." Before I could process this information, the morning bell rang. "I have to get to homeroom," Lainey said. "But everyone's talking about it. Something big is happening." Mrs. Holloway wasn't in the classroom when I arrived for history period. Instead, Principal Davidson stood at the front of the room, his tall frame commanding attention. Next to him was Mr. Reynolds, looking both nervous and resolute. "Good morning. Students," Principal Davidson began once everyone was seated. "I'm here because a matter has been brought to my attention that requires immediate address. It concerns academic integrity, which is a cornerstone of our educational mission here at Jefferson." The room was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking. "It has come to my attention that a student's test was misplaced and subsequently denied recognition. This is unacceptable. Academic achievement should be acknowledged and celebrated, regardless of who earns it." My palms began to sweat. I could feel my classmates' eyes on me. "Mrs. Holloway will be joining us shortly, and we will resolve this situation together, as a community." As if on cue, Mrs. Holloway entered the room. Her usual composed demeanor was fractured. Her face was pale, her steps hesitant. She glanced at me briefly, then looked away. "Mrs. Holloway," Principal Davidson said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Mr. Reynolds discovered Zora Williams' history test in the faculty lounge yesterday afternoon. It was scored with a 98%, the highest grade in the class." Mrs. Holloway's lips thinned. There must have been a mix-up. A mix-up that resulted in you telling Zora her test was lost, and that she would need to retake it?" Mrs. Holloway didn't respond. Principal Davidson turned to me. "Zora, I want to personally apologize for this situation. Your academic excellence should have been recognized not denied. A warm feeling spread through my chest. Relief, validation, and something like triumph all mixed together. What I'd like to do now, Principal Davidson continued, is have Mrs. Holloway officially record your grade in the class record book, in front of your peers, so there can be no further confusion. Mrs. Holloway looked as if she might protest, but after a glance at Mr. Reynolds, who stood firm with his arms crossed, she nodded stiffly. With the entire class watching, Mrs. Holloway took the test from Principal Davidson, opened her gradebook, and wrote 98% next to my name. The act was small, just ink on paper, but it felt monumental. Furthermore, Principal Davidson added, I believe this achievement deserves recognition. Zora will be awarded the Quarterly Academic Excellence Award for History. A few students began to clap, led by Tommy and Laney. Soon the whole class joined in, filling the room with applause, all except Mrs. Holloway, who stood rigid beside her desk, her face unreadable. After class, I lingered behind, not sure what to say to Mrs. Holloway or if I should say anything at all. But she left quickly, without meeting my eyes. Mr. Reynolds approached me instead. You okay, Zora? I nodded, still processing everything that had happened. Thank you for finding my test. I didn't find it by accident, he admitted quietly. After our conversation, I went looking for it. I had a hunch it might be among the papers Mrs. Holloway had taken to the faculty lounge. Why would she do that? Why would she try to hide my grade? Mr. Reynolds sighed. People have blind spots, Zora. Sometimes they can't see past their own preconceptions. Mrs. Holloway, she's from a different generation. She has certain fixed ideas about who should excel and who shouldn't. Because I'm black, I said, the words feeling heavy on my tongue. He didn't deny it. What matters is that your work stands on its own merit. Your knowledge, your effort, your intelligence. Those things speak for themselves, regardless of who tries to silence them. In the days that followed, Mrs. Holloway was noticeably subdued in class. She called on me more frequently, though our interactions remained stiff and formal. I detected no warmth in her manner, but there was a new caution, perhaps even a grudging respect. The Academic Excellence Award ceremony was held in the school auditorium the following week. My mother sat in the audience, tears in her eyes as Principal Davidson called my name and presented me with a certificate and a small trophy. As I stood on the stage, looking out at the sea of faces, I caught sight of Mrs. Holloway in the back row. Our eyes met briefly, and for a moment I thought I saw regret flicker across her features. That evening, as Mom and I celebrated with a special dinner, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, Zora. Not just for the grade, but for standing up for yourself. I had help, I reminded her. Mr. Reynolds, Tommy, even Principal Davidson. Yes, you did. And that's an important lesson, too. Sometimes you need allies in the fight for justice. But it started with you refusing to accept being erased. I thought about that word. Erased. That's exactly what it had felt like. As if Mrs. Holloway had tried to erase my achievement, my effort, my very presence in that classroom. Mom, I said slowly, do you think Mrs. Holloway will ever change? Really change, I mean. Mom considered this as she served me another piece of celebratory chocolate cake. People can change, baby. But they have to want to. They have to be willing to examine their own hearts and admit when they're wrong. That's the hardest thing for most folks to do. So you don't think she will? I didn't say that. I've seen people change when confronted with their own prejudice. Sometimes all it takes is one moment, one person, who makes them question everything they thought they knew. I wondered if I could be that person for Mrs. Holloway. I wasn't sure I wanted to be. Part of me was still angry, still hurt by her actions, but another part of me recognized the power in being the one to challenge someone's worldview, to force them to see beyond their preconceptions. The last month of school passed, quickly. Mrs. Holloway and I maintained our delicate truce. She graded my work fairly, called on me in class, but never apologized directly for what had happened. I excelled in her class, finishing with the highest grade overall, a fact that was publicly posted, as was the school's tradition. On the last day of school, as I was cleaning out my locker, Mrs. Holloway approached me in the hallway. She looked older somehow, more tired than she had at the beginning of the year. "Zora," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "I wanted to give you this." She handed me a book, the autobiography of Frederick Douglass. "I thought you might enjoy this over the summer," she said. "It's from my personal collection." I accepted the book, surprised by the gesture. "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway." She nodded, hesitated as if she wanted to say more, then simply walked away, opened the book later that night and found a note tucked inside. "To Zora, your voice matters, your work matters, your presence matters. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. L. Holloway." It wasn't an explicit apology. It wasn't an admission of prejudice, but it was an acknowledgement, and perhaps that was a beginning. Years passed. I graduated high school, went to college, earned a degree in education. The memory of that 7th grade history test faded, but never completely disappeared. It had shaped me in ways I was still discovering, making me more determined, more outspoken against injustice, more aware of the subtle ways prejudice could manifest. I returned to my hometown after college, accepting a teaching position at Jefferson Middle School, now under new administration. Many of the old faculty had retired, including Mrs. Holloway. I thought of her occasionally, wondering what had become of her, whether she had indeed changed or if our interaction had been merely a momentary disruption in a lifetime of fixed thinking. Then, on a cool autumn day nearly 20 years after the test incident, I saw her. I was shopping at a small grocery store on the outskirts of town when I spotted an elderly woman struggling to reach a can on a high shelf. Her hair was white now, her back slightly stooped, but I recognized the wire-rimmed glasses, the precise way she held herself. I approached slowly, unsure if she would remember me. "Mrs. Holloway, it's Zora Williams. I was your student years ago." She turned, squinting at me through those familiar glasses. Recognition dawned gradually. "Zora! Yes, of course. You were quite the history student. Let me help you with that," I offered, reaching for the can she'd been trying to grasp. "Thank you." She accepted the can with hands that trembled slightly. "Arthritis," she explained, noticing my glance. "Makes simple tasks rather challenging these days. I'm sorry to hear that." An awkward silence fell between us. 2 decades of unspoken words hung in the air. "I heard you became a teacher," she said finally. "Yes. At Jefferson, actually. I teach 8th grade English now." A faint smile touched her lips. "Like Mr. Reynolds. He was a great influence on me." She nodded, her gaze dropping to her shopping basket. "He was a good man, a good teacher. He saw things I sometimes missed." The admission, small as it was, surprised me. "Are you getting everything you need?" I asked, gesturing to her nearly empty basket. "These days they deliver groceries if that would be easier for you." "Oh, I manage. Most days my neighbor gives me a ride. But she's out of town this week. The taxi service here is unreliable at best. Without thinking too much about it, I offered, I could give you a ride home if you'd like, and maybe help you with your shopping. She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she nodded. That's very kind of you, Zora. I would appreciate that. As we made our way through the store, filling her basket with essentials, we talked about the school, about the changes in the town over the years, about my career. It was strange how easily the conversation flowed, given our history. When we reached her small house on Maple Street, I helped her carry the groceries inside. The home was modest, but meticulously kept, with bookshelves lining the walls. I recognized many history texts I'd studied in college. Would you like some tea? She offered as I set the last bag on her kitchen counter. I hesitated, then nodded. That would be nice. As she prepared the tea, moving slowly but purposefully around her kitchen, I noticed a familiar book on her counter. The Autobiography of Frederick Douglass. Not the copy she had given me all those years ago, but the same title. Still teaching through literature, I see, I commented, nodding toward the book. She followed my gaze. Oh, yes, though these days my only student is myself. She brought 2 cups of tea to the small table and gestured for me to sit. I've been re-educating myself, you might say. How so? She sipped her tea before answering. After I retired, I found myself with a great deal of time for reflection. Some of that reflection has been uncomfortable. I've had to confront certain biases, certain failures in my teaching career. I remained silent, sensing she had more to say. I wasn't always fair to all my students, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. My parents were products of their time, and they passed along certain views that I absorbed without question. It's not an excuse, but perhaps an explanation. We all have blind spots, I offered, echoing what Mr. Reynolds had once said to me. Yes, but as educators, we have a responsibility to recognize and address those blind spots. I failed in that responsibility many times. She met my eyes directly, including with you, Zora. The acknowledgement so long in coming washed over me like a wave. I appreciate you saying that, Mrs. Holloway. I've often thought about that incident with your test. How differently I might have handled it if I'd been a better person, a better teacher. You gave me that book, I reminded her, with the note. It meant a lot to me. A small gesture, too little, too late, perhaps. It's never too late to grow, to learn, I said. That's what I tell my students. She smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed her face. You sound like a wonderful teacher, Zora. Your students are fortunate. We talked for another hour, about books, about teaching philosophies, about the changing landscape of education. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door with small, measured steps. Thank you for the ride, and for the company, she said. It's been healing to talk with you. For me, too. I admitted, surprised to find it was true. Perhaps... She hesitated. Perhaps you might visit again sometime, if it wouldn't be too strange. I thought about the young girl I had been, sitting in her classroom, feeling invisible. I thought about the woman I was now, confident in my identity, my voice, my place in the world. And I thought about Mrs. Holloway, who had finally begun her own journey toward understanding. I'd like that, I said. And if you ever need another ride to the store, just call the school. They can get a message to me. As I drove away, I reflected on the strange symmetry of life. How the teacher had become the student. How the woman, who had once tried to diminish me, was now grateful for my help. It wasn't perfect justice. Nothing ever is. But there was poetry in it, a kind of completion that felt right. That evening, as I graded papers at my kitchen table, I pulled out my old copy of The Autobiography of Frederick Douglass, the one Mrs. Holloway had given me all those years ago. The note was still tucked inside, the paper yellowed with age. Your voice matters, your work matters, your presence matters. I realized that despite the pain of that long-ago incident, those words had taken root in me. They had shaped my approach to teaching, my determination to see every student, to validate every voice in my classroom. Maybe sharing this part of my journey could help others find their voice too. If you've ever felt unseen or unheard, know that your experiences matter. Your truth deserves to be spoken. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message, someone struggling to be seen, to be validated, share this story with them. Sometimes all it takes is one person believing in us to help us believe in ourselves. As for Mrs. Holloway and me, we've developed an unexpected friendship over these past few months. I visit her every couple of weeks, bringing her groceries or simply sitting for tea and conversation. Last week, she asked if she could visit my classroom to see me teach. Watching her observe my students, all my students, with equal attention and respect, was a powerful moment of closure for both of us. Life has a strange way of bringing people full circle. The teacher who once refused to see me now looks to me for guidance. The woman who once tried to erase my achievement now keeps a photo of me with my students on her refrigerator. And I, who once felt powerless in her classroom, now have the privilege of showing her a different way to teach, to see, to grow. It's not a perfect ending. Real life rarely gives us those. But it's a meaningful one, a testament to the possibility of change, even after decades of fixed thinking. It reminds me that teaching is never just about transferring knowledge. It's about transforming hearts and minds, including our own. And sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers.